You're listening to TuneDig, a podcast for music lovers. I miss hugging your neck, man.
This is extra fun because I could probably throw a rock 3 times and hit your house from here. You know, if I threw it and then went to the rock and threw it again a couple of times. My short game's killer. Yeah.
Bet I could throw a football over them mountains. Coach put me in, we would have won state.
And we're trying our best to be respectful of the idea that we probably shouldn't be hanging out together, person to person in the same room, even though that's kind of the foundational element of this whole thing that we do together.
Yep.
Yeah. So, surprise, you're still listening to TuneDig somehow. So yeah, Kyle, you talked me into doing this, and I'm super down and excited about it because I think we both agreed we didn't feel like this current situation would really lend itself towards whether we do it well or not. We definitely try to do those normal episodes really well, especially now that we get a chance to do it in a real studio, do a lot of research, spend a lot of time talking to one another, have a real conversation. This can't be that. So you really sold me on a new idea, and I'm really, really stoked to do this with you.
And I appreciate your openness. Yeah, I mean, when we started this thing in general, it was an art project, right? We just wanted to do something creative with all this vinyl that we were amassing, working with record stores, and a couple of punk rock kids. I don't think we ever had any inclinations of starting a podcast that would be sponsored by Blue Apron, and we'd be trying to mount the charts with Dax Shepard. This was just a creative exercise for creative exercise's sake. So I feel, and I know you do too, really protective of keeping what we refer to as the body of work pure, right? Everything is a document that, and we're starting to see it, which is really exciting, where people will Google an album where they want to learn more about it, and then we appear somewhere in the search results. And by virtue of, I think, picking really interesting records, we get included somewhere in the conversation for a good number of people, and that's been really exciting. So I don't want to, like you mentioned, take away from the process that we have created, that I feel like has been pretty successful, and we're being really mindful of how we handle that.
Yeah.
We've also been talking a lot about what role music even plays right now when we're stuck at our house. We can't see live music. I know you are totally jonesing.
I am at once more in love with music than ever, and also so tired of it I could never listen to it again.
Because live gives us the different moments, the new stuff, right? And we can't get that, so we're stuck with recorded documents and watching vertical phone screens of Orville Peck in his living room, which is great. I mean, I'll take what I can get, and he's amazing. And a lot of the people that are doing the living room concerts are really great. Shout out to our buddy Trey Vetter doing the 6-man series. But it's just not the same, right?
Right.
So trying to be really intentional, equally intentional about what's the right thing for this moment. And you joked we live 3 stones throws away from each other. We're a quick bike ride or a walk away from each other's houses. So we're message in a bottle's distance, it feels like right now, right? So it's time to do what we did to stay connected as much younger men and make mixtapes, right? I think a fun thing we used to do when we were umpiring baseball is we would talk about one specific aspect of music and just kind of go off on tangents. So this idea was inspired by kind of our roots, getting to know each other as friends and music fans. So the idea is we give each other a prompt. One person gives the other person a prompt or a theme or something, a rabbit hole to investigate. And then the other person comes back with 80 minutes of music, 80 minutes in honor of the old CDR constraints. We're showing our age. And really constraints are needed because otherwise we'd be making 3 and 4 and 5 hour playlists, and it's just disrespectfully long.
Yeah.
So it's a good exercise in seeing what we have in common, seeing what we can still teach each other at this point, and to be able to break from the kind of bounding boxes of one artist, one album, kind of one snapshot, and spend a little more time with our breadth. as music fans.
Yeah, I think like two major things I've been thinking about that'll come out differently this time, and especially important, I think, for anybody checking us out for the first time. This is going to be substantially different in a couple of ways. One is, like you mentioned, we go really deep on an artist, and we pick an album, but we always end up on some kind of scale between, was the album the important thing, was the artist the important thing, and the album was kind of a highlight of that. Was there kind of a mixture of those two in history that we want to talk about? And we do our best to really do research, go really deep. And as much as we try to avoid, we like to say to one another, we try to avoid conjecture. It's almost impossible, right. But we try to just not be two more people giving opinions about everything, especially in a longer form podcast, which it's kind of become. So this is going to be different in the sense that we're not going to try to go that deep into any of those particular rabbit holes, or even maybe not try to teach each other so many new things per se, as opposed to just that kind of raw discovery like you talked about that we kind of used to have. It wasn't really about convincing the other person or teaching them anything. It was just more like, I don't know, man, here are 14 songs that seem to go together in my head. Let's see what you think about it. And we also thought it might be helpful too, because as opposed to focusing on that album, you're going to get artists, albums, songs that we probably never would have talked about otherwise, because they don't sit in a context that's important enough to spend all that time and energy on, right? So it's cool because me and you get to share a little bit of those, like a sprinkling of a song here or there that we otherwise never would have tried to share too much about. And because we're trying to keep it from being a 6-hour like hardcore history podcast, we're going to try really hard not to talk for an hour about everything. So that'll be the two main differences. So yeah.
That last part is the part I'm really most excited about, because you've known for a long time that that's the kind of music fan that I am, right? It's like, I love contextualizing music, and this is more about contextualizing music rather than like kind of doing the anthropology of a thing. It's sort of it's almost the opposite in that way. And I'm fanatic about this, right? Like, I'm forever making playlists. I have hundreds of them on Spotify. And we were talking about when we started the project, the kind of tech project that predated TuneDig. We did a launch party for that website, and we had some of our friends' bands play. And I made a special house music playlist for each of them, like before, while they were going up. So this kind of thing is special to me, because this is how I think about music entirely. And if anybody wants to hire me as a music supervisor, please listen to the next few episodes of these and consider them my body of work.
For what it's worth, one of the things that sold me on this is you and John Asante used to have a radio show on, it's gone through so many name changes now. Album 88. What was the actual call? What were the call letters? Was it WABE?
WRAS.
WRAS, that's right. So you had this blues show, and I'm telling your story now, but I've only ever listened to one radio show in the history of my existence for the purpose of the music, and it was you and John Asante, and you showed me that being able to pull out individual songs, give them themes like you guys did, talk about them briefly, but then mostly let the music speak for itself, was something I've never really seen. And to be honest, I still don't see a lot of, even with all the internet radio stuff. So to me, it's fun to be able to have an opportunity to kind of replicate that a little bit. And then secondly, something that wasn't around back then anyway, now we can put all this stuff we talk about on one big playlist, and people can go listen to it and figure it out for themselves. And that's a really cool thing that we couldn't have done otherwise. So I'm stoked.
Let's provide a public service.
Absolutely.
We are not normally going to do this, I don't think, but we are starting with the same prompt just for a little A/B testing, and just because we both really liked the prompt. It's really broad and all encompassing. We started with favorite instrumentals, a deceptively simple place to start. So that was your suggestion. So do you want to like shed a little light on that?
Well, I'll get my own episode, so I'll shed some light on mine there. But I mean, I think a good snapshot into our probably Ridiculous is the right word. Like, level of care about music and the specifics of it all is just the fact that we had an actual conversation about what the definition of instrumentals would mean inside of this context, and still managed to walk away with two totally different ideas, basically, of what they would be. But I think as you can tell a little bit about the songs you're about to walk us through, you can kind of show the contrast that you have with how you interact with instrumental music, as opposed to me, who, I spent a lot of time learning to play music really specifically, learned a really specific instrument. And as you'll really clearly see, like, that'll bring out an aspect of what I enjoy about music specifically without vocals. And it ends up focusing on guitar a lot, but that expands out. And then I kind of have, some other more eclectic ways I think of looking at instrumentals, but we'll get into more specifics for me later on. But I think what's most important to walk away with is we did give ourselves some parameters to kind of define what this actually meant. So for you, what does this look like on your playlist?
Yeah, I definitely kept it a little looser, but the first conversation you and I had around it was like stuff that is intentionally instrumental, like as the thing that artist does. It makes it kind of a thing to exclude. So obviously most jazz, you mentioned post rock and post metal. I think the main thing, and in so many ways, the things that you and I listen to, like, I always think of you as a right here guy with the way you listen to a lot of stuff versus I'm here. For me, instrumentals are all about things that create a vibe or a texture, not necessarily background music, because I listen to a lot of the things on my playlist very actively. But for my impression of yours is that it's a lot more about the structure and the composition and the notes and the progression. And mine is just about like what kind of world does it build? What kind of mood does it create? Some of mine are very songy, like yours, but some of mine decidedly are not.
Yeah.
It starts off with really songy stuff, and then I think it gets more vibey as it goes on.
I love it. I've been spending some time listening to your playlist a bunch. So, including walking around the post-apocalyptic grocery store earlier this morning. So yeah, I'm really stoked to dig into them.
The back end of this playlist would be weird in a pandemic grocery store, I think. But the vibe starts off really good and positive. And, going back to the idea of being a music supervisor, instrumentals, I think, for me, are the thing that, like, they always go to that place that a song with words can't. I don't mean to be trite when I say that, but like when I hear an instrumental, I'm specifically thinking about the visuals that are associated with it, right? Like that's where the narrative comes from relative to an instrumental track. So my number one favorite instrumental ever, forever, and probably one of my favorite songs of all time, period, is Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs. So we talked about Otis Redding pretty recently, being one of the all-time Stax Records cats. And Booker T and the MGs played on Otis Blue, the record we talked about. And that particular tangent was a thrill for me because I'm a huge fan of Stax Records, of Otis, of Aretha, of Sam and Dave, of all that stuff. I love Memphis music, old and new, and you know how much I love like 3-6 and all that stuff. But I got to sit at the organ in the A room at Stax Records where Booker T. Jones played Green Onions. And it was a little bit like putting my hands on the sword and the stone. Like I could feel the lightning. I don't remember if I heard it in the Sandlot or when I heard it for the first time, but I was like, this is the HOV lane of feeling 10 feet tall, right? This is like penny loafers, and you put on your good shirt and you go out on the town and you strut. Like this is a strutting song. And it vibes so hard that it's an immediate attitude adjustment. And that's why I really, really like it.
So in these episodes, we won't have to introduce them this way every time. But for everybody listening, so what we actually recommend here, if you can, hop on over to Spotify or something else, grab the playlist and actually spin the song here. Like, we want you to treat it a little bit more like a radio show you can interact with. If you're listening on the podcast, we'll play that 30-second clip, right? But thanks, intellectual property law, we can't play the whole thing on the podcast. So hop over to a digital service, hop over to YouTube. We'll try to put the playlist there as well. And that way you can actually hear the song, go all the way through it, and come back and let's talk about it a little bit. So this is Green Onions. And I'm super glad that you started with Green Onions, because I do feel like that's a good opportunity to point out, if we were doing a real normal TuneDig episode trying to talk about important instrumentals, this song would definitely be on it anyway, right?
Yeah.
So we're able to really start off with one we would have nailed no matter what. This was on a backup for me. If you hadn't put it on your playlist, I was going to make sure it was on mine. So that was an awesome one to start with.
I'm also excited that you have a lot of staples on yours. Like, when I think of great instrumentals, I think of a lot of the things that are on your playlist, and I don't want to spoil it for next episode. But
no one cares much.
I like that you. No one cares about anything, and that's what makes it great. I like that yours is a little more scholarly and mine's a little more personal. Speaking of personal, the next one is super personal for me.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been shy about Queens of the Stone Age and Josh Homme's music being the prism through which I view kind of a lot of other music, especially rock and roll. So the next one is Molten Universe by Caius, from what's not their first record. It's like their third record, but it's their first real record, in my opinion, from Blues for the Red Sun. And it comes in like a 9-pound hammer, dude. And I think for all the bands that have tried to sound like Sabbath, the one band that didn't wound up doing their thing better than all of their contemporaries. When you and I were younger, I thought a lot about, we talked a lot about, like, what's the ultimate, like, slow riff? Like, what's the cool, we were always going for the cool halftime doom riff thing. Because that just felt like, where's the best place you can take the blues? Like, what's the terminal velocity of blues music? And it just felt like a big swinging sludgy riff. And Molten Universe is it. And as song titles go, it doesn't get any more badass than that, or on the nose with what the song sounds like, right? It's like super lava, like desert, ultra heavy blues. I mean, Josh Homme is playing a guitar out of a bass cab. Like, it is all low end on purpose. Yeah, maybe. I mean, it was a little bit of like, well, it just did what I had at the time. Like, one of my favorite parts of the Caius mythology is that everything about their instrumental selection and the way they tuned all the way down and then tuned back up to C, where it started having some level of tone and melody. Everything about the low end and the decision to play with like huge cymbals was so that they could cut through the wind noise and the generator noise in the desert at night when they're having these wild parties. So it was just a matter of like pure redneck function. And I love that about it. Like, it can't be replicated because it was so pure a thing. And it was so contextual. But Nick Oliveri, who played bass on this record, was like the seminal bassist in Queens, and to my knowledge is one of the most badass, like, punk style, really overdriven bassists, like super duper heavy, gritty low end. His band Mondo Generator has opened with this song in their live set list for a couple of years now, on and off. And it just, like, it sets a tone. And so I don't know. I like it. It's big and tough and swinging, and it's simple. I saw an interview with Josh Homme when I was in high school or college, and somebody was asking him about Caius, and he put together a playlist for that interview, and he said something to the effect of, like, I'm putting this song on the playlist. It was either this one or Asteroid from the follow-up record, and he was like, we did instrumentals real good, and that just seems like such an interesting thing to be proud of in the history of your band, but it's stood out to me for going on 20 years now. So I love this song. It rips.
So far, Kyle, you've taken us through Booker T and the MGs, then Caius, the classic 1-2 punch of music history. And now we're about to hit a third that is arguably more, at least as important as either one of those, I would think.
Yeah, I think if you are talking about instrumentals, you got to talk about this one. To me, this is the one, right? And it's not super songy. This goes into that jam territory, but it's absolutely one of the best recordings in the history of American popular music, for sure. And that's Maggot Brain by Funkadelic, featuring guitar from the amazing, inimitable Eddie Hazel.
I always love the way that song starts, because I always feel like I get just a little bit of Three Stacks and get a little bit of the feel of his vibe from that beginning little, hey, before we get started with this song that's going to become famous that everyone loves, we're going to say some really weird shit for no reason with reverb on top of it and just kind of leave it there. It's going to be oddly physical. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable. And then we're just going to leave it. It has nothing to do with anything. And we're just going to move on and play music for 10 minutes now. Love it.
The Three Stacks thing is appropriate. I think when you hear Maggot Brain, if you're any degree of an Outkast or Dungeon Family fan, on the whole Maggot Brain record, but especially on this song, you really get a sense of maybe not exactly the sonics, but definitely the headspace that they were going for, right? Like super pro-black, Afrofuturist, really heady, psychedelic, spacey, like literally outer space inclined. And you're right, it never really dawned on me, but the social commentary bit at the beginning is also really weird and poetic. It's like a super Big Rube interlude type thing. But I mean, you can easily draw that through line from Funkadelic to the Dungeon Family to Donald Glover, right? I remember when Awaken My Love came out, I tweeted Donald picked up where Three Stacks left off. But both of them and really everything that they've done with trying to like raise the vibrations of consciousness, like this is the Rosetta Stone for them and for so many other incredible artists. And it's 10 minutes, 11 minutes? Just on paper, it has all the makings of something terrible, right? It's like 10 minutes of super drugged out, nonstop soloing over just a quiet arpeggiation. But it works, man. I think the thing about Hazel's playing on Maggot Brain is he's making it cry. You know, it's such an evocative vocal. It says a lot. It's a great example of an instrumental because he says more than the best lyrics could do in that context. When that song is over, you feel like you've been on a journey, like you're spent. It's just there's so much in that. There's like 10,000 light years of lived experience in that jam. He pours it all out.
That's why it's worth like trying to give into the format that we got here. Like, talk about it, go listen to that song, take the 10 minutes, right? Like, make sure you're actually spinning this like a radio show, and then come back, because like that actually gives the feel. Like, when else are you just gonna put, unless you're you, who else is going to put on an 11-minute song like this just to kind of sit there and be like, yeah, I really should listen to it? Like, no, like, listen to these things in sequence so that you can hear the different ways that they draw on one another. Obviously, not intentionally. These songs span decades, right? But like, when you listen to this in sequence, or at the very least in the order that we're talking about it here, you really hear different aspects of the different songs, just because a song is never a song in and of itself, right? It never exists in a vacuum. You play it in any environment and you hear something different and something new every time. So it's worth doing it this time, especially because that super weird line that you've now created, where we do green onions and then caius and then maggot brain. And then we've got something a little lighter fare coming up.
Yeah, when you talk about instrumentals being like a song that probably should have words but doesn't, use that as kind of a qualifier, and that was like, oh yeah, okay, so just a song without words, rather than like we're trying to make it an instrumental. To me, this next one, it typifies that. It's just a really good groove. And it was like, oh, this is self-sufficient. We don't need to put anything over it. And it's from the group that was as good as it got with groove. Without them, there would be so many things that we didn't really experience the way that they are. The group is the Meters from New Orleans, Louisiana. And the song is Sissy Strut, kind of their signature song.
Yeah.
Yup. And then it just goes into that group. Like they gas their own thing up to where you're like, oh, like, you know, when a song comes on in the club and you're like, oh shit, yeah, exactly.
Let's open this.
This is my jam, boy. This is like that, but you got a joint on your lip and you're like walking the French Quarter, right? You're like, you got the Hunter S. Thompson long cigarette thing, and it's like broken, and you got the hat, and you're just your physics are kind of messed up. I'm so glad we're recording this video so I can do stuff like this that people normally never get to see.
Not only do they get to see you making that, but they get to see me making the face that I would make at you if you did that.
Yeah. Inside baseball. You know, I had heard this song a bunch of times. Like, I think it had been on movie soundtracks, and I'd heard it a handful of places. And then I learned very late in the game that Zigaboo, the drummer, who has like this really idiosyncratic groove style, like has his own, no pun intended, meter, was kind of the primary drumming influence for John Bonham. So I started listening to Zeppelin in an entirely different way when I would go listen to a whole Meters record and then listen to like Zepp 4. It recontextualized all that for me. And so I really like the drummers that can do the funk thing. And outside of James Brown and the JBs, like New Orleans funk has such its own thing. Like the city, it's such a gumbo of different styles. And similarly to this, thinking about it as an influence on Zeppelin, I think about Corrosion of Conformity, a rock band that I like a lot. For their last record before their long hiatus, In the Arms of God, they got Stanton Moore from Galactic, another New Orleans funk band, like kind of a jam band. And they gave him Sabbath, Deep Purple, and Zeppelin records. and they were like, you have your thing, we're trying to make this record, let's see what the halfway point between those two things sounds like. And it's like shreddy meters to me, because they play, it's like really notey. And I remember Dave Grohl talking about Bonham in an interview, and I think Bonham would have said the same thing about Zig. It's like bar to bar, you never know what he's going to do. Like if you try to do a play along with a meter song, you're going to get tripped up within the first 32, if not the first 16. So it's deceptively simple patterns, and really interesting. And it just grooves like hell, man. It's such a rad song. It's super funky. If you had the walking physics of like the Grateful Dead animated character guy, where you're just like, whoa, you would be walking to Sissy Strut. Great jam. So then next, after that, complete mood shift. And I was stunned to learn that you didn't know this song. As interesting a blind spot as you could have as a music fan, because it is sort of guitar-y. It's lap steel.
Oh, for sure.
But another one of my super duper favorites, Sleepwalk by Santo and Johnny. And interestingly, the most commonly available version in Spotify is the version on the Hearts and Atlantis soundtrack, the Silence of the Lambs sequel. Or maybe that's not even right, but it's Anthony Hopkins in the movie. I'm probably totally misremembering what the movie's even about, but Sleepwalk is like if Link Wray's Rumble is the most awake instrumental there is, this is the best like asleep one. Like if Rumble is fire, this is water for sure. It definitely has a very watery quality. They did a lot of like beachside sounding stuff. Santo and Johnny did like surf guitar, but dreamier. It's very pastoral, lap steel. But this is, to me, one of the best slow jam, like first dance at a wedding songs. Very classic. Got an iconic American like burgers and milkshakes vibe. But I like stuff from the 50s, from like that era where the narrative is that nothing went wrong, you know? The era when allegedly America was great. I roll. But it gets glossed over as like diners and, you know, big cars and be true to your school and all that. I like the music that is very gentlemanly from that time. It has like kind of a dark undertone. It's got something a little mournful or a little evil. And Sleepwalk has a little bit of that tinge of something darker going on, the same way that my favorite doo-wop song, I Only Have Eyes for You by the Flamingos, does as well. So it's got some depth. I think a lot of that comes from like space and reverb and the way that it was recorded, but super, super vibey.
That one's getting played by me a lot now. Thanks.
I'm so glad. I'm like, that's my first favorite takeaway from this new format.
Heck yeah. Let's keep riding. What's next? Even though
next is a group.
Next
is a group that is squarely in the Venn diagram between the two of us, and that's Bad Bad Not Good from Toronto. One of, I think, our favorites to see live over the past couple of years. Just a tremendous jazz quartet. Are there 3, 4, or 5 people in the group now? I don't even know. But between their third and fourth record, I think they put out a couple of 7 inches, and this was probably 2014 or 15, when like the SoundCloud thing was starting to peak, and it was like you can put out one song and it could like wind up on Tumblr and start doing ripple effect numbers there. So this is a song called Velvet, and whenever I'm writing year end, like here was my favorite music of the year list, there's always one where I do the like recommended if you like, and none of it's other music. It's just like vibe stuff. So I remember writing this up that year and being like, Maduro cigars, like 3 fingers of really nice bourbon, shoes without socks, hanging in the Burge lobby. It's a super sophisticated, sensuous groove. And it's funny because they're just like Toronto punkers. You know, it's not, they're very anti-jazz in the way that they present, but this is a cool, like, this is cool jazz. And Velvet, like if you're going to name a song Velvet, that's a Prince move, you know, it's got to play. And it does. So this was the A side, and I don't remember what the B side was, but they put out 2 7-inches around that time, and all the songs were really good. But this was the one, Slinky. Is that in line with the Bad Bad Not Good that you like, or do you like the like harder edge, jammier?
For sure. No, I was just about to say I love that one because it's one of the like 90% of Bad Bad Not Good songs, you know, immediately it's them. Usually by like the drumming feel. Like even when he's doing something totally unique, you feel the way he plays drums, and it is quintessentially Bad Bad Not Good. If you are hearing Bad Bad Not Good for the first time or haven't thought about them a lot, we did a whole episode on one of their records. They rule. It was awesome. We loved it. We could have talked about it for a long time. There's some incredible, very not instrumental music that they've made as well. They make incredible pop songs, just great collaboration. So a lot to dive in there if Velvet caught your attention.
Yeah, I would say I think we said something to this effect when we covered them originally, but they're like, if you think you want to get into jazz and you can't find an entry point with Blue Note or with the classics, and like Kind of Blue feels a little too standard, this is a good like side door into jazz a little bit, because they were soundly rejected by the jazz zeitgeist, I guess, the powers that be in jazz, whatever that means, when they first came out. And we saw them, I mean, the first time we saw them was at like an opening night of Atlanta Jazz Fest, at the Atlanta Contemporary, and it was super ripping. So they're like jazz plus. Next one is the first instrumental that I remember being enamored with specifically as an instrumental, by one of my favorite bands of my whole life, and a band that I'm working on emulating in style while we're in quarantine, ZZ Top. So on Tejas, when they started kind of fanning out from, this was after Tres Hombres, after LaGrange, after the big Texas Worldwide tour, where they kind of started fanning out into their like weirdness, owning their weirdness a little more. They put out Tejas in 75, and there's something so deceptively cut above about them, where like, I remember Fred Armisen said in an interview he loves ZZ Top because like they could have done one thing, but then they played the whole song in like a minute and a half, and then they just did an outro riff for like another minute and a half on Heard It on the X, right? So like they can make normal choices, but they never do. but it's still like a 3-minute song and it's very digestible. They're always finding ways to just turn the corner and subvert a little. So this song is Asleep in the Desert, and it closes out Tejas, and it's my favorite like nighttime wind down, have a high life at the end of the night song, sit on the porch song. Very simple, like it's got an old cowpoke looking up at the moon vibe. Very simple, pretty minimalistic. Some Spanish guitar on top of a kind of a blues thing. I think Teja, like thinking about the album name and looking at the album artwork where it's nighttime over a big ranch or the desert. This song feels a lot like that album artwork looks. So it's a great wind down without being like, when you go to ambient wind down or whatever playlist on Spotify, it's all like Tycho and shit like that. This is something that's got a little more like classic timeless fare feel than that. But it's still very, very mellow. And thus begins a run of things that are pretty mellow, that I don't need to talk about in great detail, but just want to cover. Throw Rag is a Los Angeles band that I saw open for Queens of the Stone Age when I was in high school.
I was wondering how they ended up on this playlist.
They had a washboard player. They stuck in my mind forever because they had a washboard player who looked like a Baldwin brother, and he was wasted. I mean, he was too drunk to function. And he was wearing a dirty wife beater and playing the washboards and getting in the crowd and doing that. And their singer is Sean Wheeler, who's like one of the godfathers of the desert punk scene, one of the OGs from like the 80s, just a maniac dude. He dressed up like a ship captain, like a love boat captain with like velour smoker's jacket and a captain's hat. And they are so a product of the low desert in Southern California where they're just freaky and like a little bit acid fried. And they scared me a little bit. It was like sailor punk or something. I don't know what the rest of their music sounded like, but then I bought the record at the merch table because I was like, this is a thing that I know none of my friends will have. And then it had the song El Paraiso at the end of the record. And it's a like being out on a boat at night type of jam. So I would always listen to Asleep in the Desert, and El Paraiso would be like, they would bookend a like nighttime mixtape for me. And then another desert band who we've seen a bunch of times, fortunately now, Yawning Man, Boomer, Mario Lally, like the true godfather of the desert rock scene. They finally put out a record after years and years of being the Melvins of that scene, right? Like the band that ushered in all the other bands. They put out a record called Rock Formations in the early 2000s, and that it's like surf rock kind of. It's really spacious. It's like a spaghetti western soundtrack for hippies is the best way I know how to describe it. It is my absolute favorite record to fall asleep to because it has got movement. It drives a little bit. It's a great driving record when you're out in wide open space, but it's also a really mellow record as well. And the interesting thing about Yawning Man is that Gary Arce, I think is his name. I don't know. The long-haired fella that plays guitar, like, doesn't know how to tune or play conventional chords. So you wind up with these weird kind of textural things. And then Mario, the bassist, is such a good musician that he plays around that. So Yawning Man doesn't sound like anything else in the world. But it does feel like when you can get your mind really, really quiet, and there's a lot of space in it, Yawning Man is one of those great sounding bands that can kind of fill the whole space inside your head.
Yep. They're simple really and straightforward without being boring.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm really excited that you have become a pretty big fan of them. So I'd love to hear a little more about like what drew you in.
The ability to play ridiculously late shows, actually show up, be sober enough to perform, and us get home at like 4:15 in the morning because they've played at some trashy bar in some side closet room. I was like
borderline falling asleep standing up at that show. It was so great.
But like, I've seen 4 or 5 different bands at a super late night show before, and I've been there when it's not gone well, and it just makes you regret everything you've done over the last 24 hours. But like when you've got a good show, even when it starts super late, like it's a relief. Like I've waited all day to get to this ridiculously late thing. I've been drinking Red Bull for 6 hours. Like I know I'm probably going to fall asleep at least once while they're playing. So I really hope that they start well and also end well because I might miss the middle. And they just like, it's such a good, like casual, reliable show to go to. And that's really hard to find from a rock band, especially one that has more of that kind of post-rock leaning like you're talking about, and guys who play a little less conventionally too. I love it.
You're right about the late night show thing. I hadn't really thought about that, but they're good because like when you can have a Red Bull and like push through the tired, if you take a nap before one of those shows and you push through, you're like really awake, and the night outside is quieter, right? Because like the bar scene is trimming down. So you're like really focused in, you're kind of wired and you're in, and yeah, it heightens all your senses, and they're a good band for those circumstances. So then from there, another guitar band you and I have seen a whole bunch of times, who our favorite thing about their shows is probably the drummer, other than the rest. Yeah. That band is Boris from Japan. Just so one of one, that band. And record to record, you never really know exactly what you're going to get. So very exciting, just wildly creative. 3-piece, super heavy from Japan, heavily influenced by the Melvins and kind of the Melvins Earth scene. So the song that I've selected is the introduction, the first track from Akuma no Uta, whose cover is an homage to Nick Drake. But this is essentially like, I know I made the joke when we talked about Sun, that I'd seen that tweet where Rob Hubel was like, just saw 3 dudes in robes tune their instruments for 2 hours talking about Sun. This is sort of that. It's just a big, heavy, reverberating drone that they just kind of pitch shift a little in a couple of different places and just like let the guitar layer over itself. But it's a sinus clearer. It's a like, until Pyroclast, until the new Sun had come along and it felt very meditative, this was the thing for like tuning forking myself in the mornings, you know, where it's just the simplest, most it's a note reduction exercise, right? Where you just want to get pure vibrations going to kind of align your whole thing. I originally used it to fall asleep too, but now it's become more of like a wake up thing. And I don't know that I was really onto Boris until you were. Like I had every reason to like Boris because of the other stuff that I liked, but you were first to that party where I think you were like, dude. And I think you're maybe more into their active stuff. I don't know. Do you have a favorite Boris record?
No, because every record is some weird cross section of things that have just crossed their mind in the last 3 years. It would be really interesting to like sort their songs into different collections. But yeah, for the most part, yeah, like I love that they do the droney stuff and then hit a bunch of punk stuff for like 5 minutes and then go back to drone for a while.
Yep.
Nothing is sacred except for the drummer yelling and being glamorous. And there's just no. That's a gong, by the way. No, yeah, okay.
Yeah. That's not me hitting Andre 3000 in the face.
The positioning was questionable, but we'll talk about that later.
Sorry. Blessings to Dre. So then rounding out that is Engine of Ruin by Earth, Dylan Carlson. Mark Lanigan, one of my favorite singer-songwriters, just put out a memoir, and he talked about his friendship with Dylan Carlson, kind of a godfather in Seattle. There would be no sun without Earth. The name Sun is a reference to Dylan Carlson and what he's done. Engine of Ruin is the song from The Bees Made Honey in the Lion's Skull, which is a weird name that I had to say out loud in college radio because this record was in heavy rotation when I was at the station. But this was when Dylan Carlson shifted away from the super heavy feedbacky stuff into like Americana. It's like ghostly, haunted Americana, cowboy, spaghetti western type music, but in a very different way than Yawning Man. It's very American Western Gothic, like tall, dark, stranger, cowboy type of music. It's very evocative, very like Old West without being hokey or weird. So the song Engine of Ruin, I think, just hits the best kind of groove. Like it's like a gear that like keeps getting locked in the same catch as it's turning over and over. And it's really, really hypnotic, and it captures a lot of time and space in itself. Great little run there of like dark nighttime music. Coming out of that, a song from The Social Network, Score, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. The scores that they did, dude, the scores that they did for Social Network and Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, as evidenced by the fact that they are like $400 or $500 on vinyl on Discogs, are really like if you're going for a dark vibe, if it's wintry outside, if it's like late in the middle of the night for The Social Network, right? Like times when they were up coding at Harvard, or if you're caught in a snowstorm, put on The Social Network or Girl with a Dragon Tattoo scores respectively. Really spacey, pensive stuff. So good. Whether or not you like Nine Inch Nails or anything else Trent Reznor has done, super great vibe. The next one I don't even know how to pronounce. Shimon Muene. I don't know.
Shashevsky. Yeah.
Jave. Hailu Margia was an Ethiopian keyboardist who relocated to DC, I recently learned. But I went to Desert Days. Hold up, the coaster that I'm drinking out of right now. A couple of years ago, and it is a festival at Lake Paris. So it's like a state park with a man-made reservoir by the mountains with a beach in the middle of the Southern California desert. And it's like going to a festival on another planet. It's very sci-fi. And the main stage is right on the water. So there's like people swimming, and there's these weird, crazy neon psychedelic light exhibits. And when you arrive, there's house music playing over the loudspeakers, and they have this song on a loop. And it's like keyboard, it's like Rhodes and accordion, and he's just playing like Eastern modes over and over. And so to me, it feels like being in a completely unfamiliar place and headspace. It's an out of body experience. It's my way to like snap into that and achieve it really quickly.
So one thing, I love that song overall. Couple of things that are awesome about that to me. One is so much of that music was written and was instrumental for a really specific reason, because of a dictatorship that he was under that created censorship about the lyrics you could use. And he like openly acknowledged the fact that, hey, if you write instrumentals, you don't have as many government censorship problems. Pretty clever.
I did not know that. That's super punk.
Yeah. Yeah, they were I also cannot pronounce the name of the dictator who ruled over his life either. But apparently, like the rules that were put in place were designed to like tamp down the nightlife or whatever, because we can't have people having fun, right? So in like that was explicitly tied to the way that music was created really often in that part of the world. And so the music scene, for lack of a better term, was able to figure out how to keep making music. And then this was one particular angle that could be taken so that you would not have to basically put your own music past a government censor in order to release it at all. So like
that's rad.
For sure.
And he's still alive, still going. He's
got a new record out this year.
I think he did put out a new record recently. So I'm very excited and hopeful that we'll get to see him live at some point. The way that I was hoping we'd get to see Damo Suzuki from Cannes. That was one of the shows that was canceled, postponed. So I like that you and I have hit kind of a chord together where we both really enjoy like weird counterculture stuff from the 70s, but like really particular and world moments, right? Like Damo and Cannes from Germany, Hailu from Ethiopia, just finding those really specific pockets of like what did punk look like in some of these other scenes essentially around the world.
Yeah.
And he's a really good example of that. He's a really sophisticated punk type guy. I like his whole vibe. Homestretch. Eugene's Lament by the Beastie Boys from the end sound from Way Out, because I was so blown away by the idea that like I thought they were a rap group, but then maybe they were also punk, but then they like played fuzz rock too. And this was all by like 94, 95. And in sound from Way Out, the cover and pretty much everything about the aesthetic. I can't remember where. Perry and Kingsley was a group. I don't know anything about Perry and Kingsley, but they made what they called electronic pop music of the future. And it had titles like Cosmic Ballad and Baroque Hoedown. It's like music technology was coming along really fast. So things like the Moog, people were experimenting with it in really novel and like kind of cheeky ways. And there's so much dollar bin stuff when you go record hunting, like Perry Kingsley's In Sound From Way Out. Not that one in particular. It's a pretty tough find, but a lot of weird, like, I was at a record store in Athens and they had like Moog country songs, and it was like a hillbilly alien on the cover sitting at a Moog. And so that's come a long way. I think it's become more nuanced in a lot of ways, but Eugene's Lament is a super, like, it's got that high violin thing the whole time. It's got like a paranoid, almost like psycho suite thing to it. But also was underpinned by like really cool grooves. They were into like bobo, like neck bone type grooves, like bongos and stuff. And there's a lot of that type of grooving all over the record. And then they do these like weird kind of left turns like this song. It's really cool.
Its placement in this playlist really brings out some of the Eastern influence that I don't think would be quite as evident if it hadn't come after something literally Ethiopian. So I loved that because I had heard it, but never right after some of this stuff, right? And it put it in totally different context. Now for something that doesn't need context in just a second.
but I thought of it because of context,
All
right? I was like, oh, the Beasties are the first like sort of hip hop entree in this to me really at all. I would say the closest thing before that was the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross thing.
Yeah.
Because it's electronic, right? But like short of it just being a beat, where there's an actual song and it's just the instrumental version, because that could and should be its own rabbit hole. The End by 3 6 Mafia weirdly always threw me for a loop because it was an instrumental on the record. It's the title track, and there are a lot of weird things about it. One is that it's this like super dark vibe, and it was just as menacing as their songs about like murder and robbery and all that kind of occult stuff that they were doing back in those days. And that they chose the title track to not have lyrics, and it still had that big intensity like the rest of the songs was interesting. But it also, I only recently found out, the weird kind of like noise sample is from the end of Darling Nikki. And I love Juicy J as a producer.
Okay.
And he makes really excellent choices with sampling, especially around like soul. I learned about Willie Hutch because he sampled I Choose You for International Players Anthem. He sampled Tell Me Why Is Our Love Turned Cold for Stay Fly. But he had a lot of weird samples back in the day. He's a world-class producer. I don't think it gets talked about enough in the rap producer conversation. But this is a really interesting, like, rap classical type thing almost. And they were like gutter back in these days. Like, I don't think you would think of anything about 3-6 or Hypnotized Camp as high art. But this, in retrospect, is a little bit of an art document. Certainly when you think about how influential the 3-6 sound is now to so much other rap. But like, I would put The End in a movie, or at least in a trailer, right? Like, for the right kind of horror trailer, The End would be a really, really cool choice, because the beat's super hard. It doesn't leave a lot for ambience, but it's got great atmosphere. two that I have always kind of paired together. Visarvagan from Dunyan's Tio Batar, Swedish band that I love a lot, very like kind of jazz rock. This has a very Nordic, like being wrapped in a sweater vibe. It's got flute and violin, and it's very like sweet and tender. So I liked it coming after the end because it was a little bit of uplift. It was a little bit of like hot chocolate after you left the scary movie.
Yeah, like stylistically, it reminds me of Little Tybee from Atlanta.
Oh yeah,
but then conceptually, me and you talk about stuff like this all the time, but like the idea of Swedish bands borrowing American musical concepts and then doing them even better than the concepts that they got them from. So like them with kind of this psych and folk stuff also made me think of like another band we could talk about forever, Graveyard, a very Swedish band who sounds like they've been playing the blues their entire lives, right? And it's like something happens and they're able to actually grab whatever important piece of culture they need to bring back into their music. And some of these Swedish bands just nail American music culture in really strange ways.
I don't know what it is about their culture, and I'm going to hugely generalize right now, right? But like thinking about the through line of all of those bands that we like across a lot of different genres, for a society that is trying really hard to achieve utopia, these bands play pain really well. There's like or maybe it's not pain, it's like a world weariness, a wisdom. They've seen it all, they know it all, and they got the systems around it. But like, yeah, Graveyard is one of the best things smoking right now. Like great blues vocals and ripping licks, and Dunyan on the jam kind of folk psych side, and they've gotten jazzier as they've gone on, and they've done some score work. But Dunyan, our friend Jason Krutsky, who was in a band called Stone Rider and is a great songwriter and musician in his own right, I think Dunyan is probably one of his favorite bands. So they could easily be slotted in with like The Dead or CSNY, or they could go some weird places that you might not put them otherwise because they're so Swedish and they don't get talked about in kind of the same context. But like, if jam bands were cool, they'd be more like Dunyan, I think.
Checks out.
So then from Dunyan, I went to Alan Gorgier. I don't speak French, and my wife does, and I'm going to embarrass myself, but the Planet Sauvage, with the soundtrack with the famous drawing of the blue alien on the cover, just an absolutely phenomenal score. So La Femme is my favorite cut from that. And I debated what from the like Alan Gorgier, David Axelrod, the like kind of 60s mod. I love all of that big Hollywood of the 60s sounding stuff. Where you contrast that with the original In Sound from Way Out thing that I was talking about, where it was like the XYZ of the future of the 60s. This was like the timeless thing that wound up sounding futuristic. Just super rad.
Kind of collection here, this one feels the most alive in terms of the way that the instrumentation, it's hard to describe. It's worth listening to kind of in that active versus passive mindset, because it really does kind of feel like maybe we can say it this way, like the instruments in a way that like in a symphony even would occasionally, like a violin or a group of violins would kind of like take on a persona and kind of move around in a way, whereas other instruments are kind of responding to them, or maybe they're like secondary characters in the scene. Like different parts of this song in particular really draw out that approach, I think, and it feels like you're being told a story without words, and I love it.
For sure. For sure. That whole score is really good.
Yeah.
This just, it falls kind of somewhere in the middle of it. I would say if you're looking for something really groovy to like put on the turntable when you're having people over and you want it to feel really cool, maybe not all of that score is appropriate from my recollection, but certainly parts of it like this do really, really well in those types of moments. So then we close out with a group from the UK called Teeth of the Sea, who have done score work, who have done a lot of like, I think this borders on the post-rock, post-metal thing almost. They put out a 3-song EP in 2010 called Hypnoticon that has a cover from Queen's Flash Gordon score, I think the love theme from that. And then a song called Hypnoticon, and this song, The Island Is. It's 11 minutes long, and I would describe it as if you're trying to go to that place in the dead center of your brain where you're like on a desert island by yourself and there's nothing around. It's like all white around you, and you're just totally cleared out. The way you would describe the feeling of Nirvana, it's like everything and nothing at once. This is that song for me. It's very like mournful and distant. It's very minimal. You like can't really tell where the shifts happen in the song unless you're listening really actively. And then there's the Mayday transmission recordings in the background. So it's very like, I don't want to call it haunting. That's not the right word, but it's transportive for sure. And it takes me away. Like, so I put it at the end, one, because it's long. It's like kind of a denouement to the whole thing. It's a great end of the night, going to sleep thing. But it also is like very far away, like fade to black. And it's super personal for me as well.
We did it. We made it through our first playlist mixtape episode thing that we have to do because the Rona. We did it. It's very exciting.
I would say from here, if this is the first and last one that you listen to, we want this thing to be as interactive as possible. So please share with us your favorite instrumentals for one, and tell us what stuff, give us some ideas about prompts. Tell us what stuff you'd like to see us tackle from here.
Yeah. Instagram's the easiest place to find us because Facebook sucks. And yes, we know they're owned by the same people, but I don't know. I actually don't have a good reason other than Instagram is cool and people talk to us there. And we care more about connecting with other human beings about music than we do about Mark Zuckerberg, as much as I do care about not giving money to Mark Zuckerberg.
Yep.
Yeah, nods. And then usually at the end of our episodes too, we remind you that we always give away a copy of the album we talk about on vinyl. That would be like physically and conceptually impossible in this situation. But like we said, we will be like, we're posting these playlists. Give it a shot. Try it out like a radio show. Give it a shot like a playlist and just listen to the podcast, whatever works for you. The idea is to give you something different that we care about. And something that'll maybe give you something new to think through, help you let music hit you in a new way while we're trying to figure out how to handle all of this stuff.
This has been a blast. Looking forward to doing more of them, and looking forward to hearing from our friends out there in internet land. Stay safe, be well, stay sane. See you in the next one.